But we have our next stage here, which is supplies.
Mm-hmm.
So supplies can usually mean, the usual. So that would be like things you would use to get into the hobby. So these are going to be like, what do you need for the game that you're into? You kind of figured out what scale of game you want to play. You figured out what you want to play. You've got a game in mind. You've maybe tried a game out, like a demo game at a local game store. Maybe you play Tabletop Sim.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be looking more into later on to buy something. Or maybe your parents are buying you, or maybe you're buying a gift for somebody for Christmas, like a starter box or something. Usually a lot of game companies like to make Christmas special gift boxes that you can only buy there. That's like a whole army to play with. So it's like, what do you need to look into to get yourself prepped for your first time getting into actually buying your stuff?
Mm-hmm.
I recommend buying your supplies first for this, because that way it kind of gets you used to, you have it all laid out.
Yes.
So if you say buy something that's going to be a lot of models, you'll have the supplies and the glues and all that stuff to cover it. Whereas if, say, maybe you were expecting everything to be plastic, but because you did your research and you found out other games are into it, then you'd have the super glue already.
Yeah.
And that way you're not like, okay, I bought my first box, or my parents bought me a box for Christmas, and I'm going to open it, and oh, why isn't my glue gluing?
Yes. Oh, please don't use like craft glue on your...
Or you're like, I have glue at home, I have box cutters at home, which is fine to start. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, oh, I can't find the clippers, or I don't have, the glue is not enough. Mm-hmm. That way you just have everything kind of prepped in your area. That's basically what this section is. So it's going to be a guide of what to look at and what to prepare for the next video.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So starting at the top here, we have to play. What supplies do you need to play?
Almost certainly it's going to be some form of rule book. It'll be a core rule book.
Yeah, we actually have all this stuff right here, right beside us. So you're going to need, like Callum was saying, you're going to need your rule book, or a lot of modern day games, smaller companies have these things as an app. Mm-hmm. Conquest is an app-based game. Judgment's an app-based game.
Yeah,
things like that.
Turnip 28, you could just download the rules online.
Yeah, Turnip, Trench Crusade, as of now, are all PDFs.
Yeah.
So, again, in researching, you will find this stuff. But yeah, so you're basically, you need your rule book.
Yes.
Next off, you're going to need dice.
Dice.
Usually 6-sided dice like these. Every company makes them. They're the numbers that you roll for the random generated outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Other games might use special ones, like a lot of the Star Wars games or games made by Fantasy Flight use their own dice engine is what they call it, but it's just like D8s with custom sides on it. Judgment also uses their own dice for stuff, which I've actually, if you saw my video on it, highly recommend watching it. I really like how they do combat in it. In the interview I do with Simon with Creature Caster, I talk about it, how I really like it, but that's a topic for a different game.
Yeah.
But yes, you're going to need rulebook, dice. If you're not playing a grid-based game like Battletech is, you're going to need a tape measure for the most part.
Yep.
Or other games like Legion, stuff like that. Star Wars Legion will have custom rulers that will come in your starter box. So a measurement or movement system. And then lastly, of course, will be in the next video, but minis. But
yeah,
that's up for you to decide. But the core ones that you will need universally to play is a surface, a rule set, and your randomization tool. Do you have any things that you would add to this list of supplies?
I think it's a great start. Yes, tape measure, dice. Some games are going to have custom dice. I know that 0200 Hours has custom dice.
Yep.
Bolt Action has order dice, which are, I would call custom dice. A lot of D6 custom dice, you can just allocate certain results to numbers, and you can roll a normal D6 for them. I'm trying to think. Some games will have some sort of weird extra thing. I know that in Bolt Action, you need a dice bag. Check out your game and see if it has anything else that is required for it.
Yeah, so as he was saying, your game specific and your general. General would be your tape measure, your rule book, stuff like that. Your game specific will be your order dice, your specialty dice, dice bag, stuff like that.
Tokens. They tend to come in starter sets.
Or they come with the unit.
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Or like if you buy like this box, say this game required you to have special cards or they had special markers because they had a unique ability, it would usually come in the box with them, and they're usually just punch outs or something like that.
Yeah.
Or with Judgment, but because it's a MOBA-based game, every hero is unique in its own like faction. It has custom little resin tokens for abilities that come with it.
Yes.
So it all depends on the company.
And it has custom cards too.
Yeah.
Again, you sort of you're gonna largely be fine if you get a starter set. Starter sets have these things in mind.
Yes.
The person who designs it, assuming they're good at it. I think everyone who gets to the point of releasing it is good at it. They're gonna have a lot of these things already ready for you.
Cat.
Coming up. But that probably leads into step 2, building.
Yes. So we'll get into the finer details into building we're going to talk about, but we'll actually get into buying your minis, building your list, playing, how all that stuff, the fine, minute details in our next video, which is actually going to talk about building and playing. So this is, we already kind of referenced that, you've already kind of referenced that, but this is going to be your tools like clippers, glues, and a safe area to build.
Yes.
Cutting that, stuff like that.
Yeah. Files.
Yeah.
A keen knife will do. You can get a hobby knife.
Yeah, so you're kind of going to be looking for, it really depends on the material that you want to play. Material, I mean like what the model's actually made out of.
Yes.
So like a majority of models nowadays are made out of plastics, but it's that classic dark gray plastic that you see all unpainted models.
They do, a lot of companies make a ready-made hobby toolkit.
Yeah.
I found they're quite affordable. They tend to come with an array of basic tools. So you're going to have your snips that get the specific parts of the model off of the sprue. The sprue being the actual sort of rectangular piece of plastic that everything is attached to. That's part of the manufacturing process. Tidy them up, get them glued to your base with some very good quality glue.
Yeah, so we can actually kind of, to top up on that, for because this is a learning stuff video, what he means by flash, he kind of already did a quick explanation, is, and you will have things called mold lines in flash. This is usually where the two pieces of like the two-sided ice cube tray of resin will push together to make that seal. That's usually on like along the body parts. You usually see it on the flat. If you look at where we actually have,
You want to show this one?
so on the sprue here, as you see like this outline right across here that like frames it, hence the frame. Usually on this plane, you will see where the two pushed together to make it.
Okay, so you have to imagine that the machine came together like this, and I'll say it was injected by plastic.
Yeah.
Filled the space.
This circle right here.
Yeah. The mold line basically just guarantees that this was filled completely with no bubbles. It's part of the manufacturing process. That way you get less bubbles.
Yeah.
There is extra material that tends to come off of the injection port.
Yep.
That's so that they can guarantee that this entire space was filled.
Whereas with flash, is something you'll see definitely a lot more with resin. Resin models can actually be injection molded that way, like built that way, but as usually a singular solid piece. You get a lot more detail, they're a lot more solid, and they're going to be chunkier, just like how the Judgment models we showed, those are resin. And because the same idea, because they're not on a frame, you don't have that nice Foley close, and they're usually bigger chunks or bigger pieces that are one. So they have a little bit more looseness to them, or they're constantly, because they're a rougher material, they'll wear down the mold a lot quicker, which will leave little pockets of air or cuts and stuff. And some of the resin might, like, because it spins, they do spin cast with resin.
I see.
Might kind of fling some of the resin into those cracks, which leads like a little flake of resin stuck maybe in between an armpit or a weapon that you just kind of rub with a knife and it comes off.
Yeah, they're very thin. But there are some. Just be aware that there are some materials that have difficulty with certain kinds of glues.
Yeah. And
just be aware that that's a possibility, and I'd say try your best to make sure you get the tool that matches the job. There was this one kind of. Do you remember the? It wasn't Tamiya. What was that model tank?
Oh.
Do you remember that one? Because it didn't react with a certain kind of glue.
Yeah, that was
that I had.
Yeah, the
Tiger One.
The Tiger One.
Was it Rubicon?
Yeah, it was Rubicon, which then leads into our last part, which is paints.
Paints.
Oh. Go on.
I'll say this. Painting is best when you apply a base coat, and then you have some options. I know of the term, there are washes, block color.
Getting into it, our side notes here is it is okay to play unpainted.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of videos online. Primed, can versus paint on, or airbrushing.
Yeah.
Your starter sets and air versus brush. We Callum kind of covered a bunch of these. There is a big buzz a couple of years ago was like contrast or speed paints. I'm just going to say it straight out of the gate. In concept, the way I would highly recommend starting your first painting, I would go speed paint or whatever the Vallejo one's called over contrast, just because of cost.
Mm.
Depending on where you live, of course. If you live in Europe, it's probably going to be about the same, maybe a little cheaper for Army Painter, but like it's still a better deal to buy contrast than it. And that also leads into what side of paints are good for you, and you'll find that out through your category. But before we get into that, let's start at the top with, it is okay to play unpainted.
We're ending the stigma.
Yes. Hashtag, you don't have to slay the gray. That's a Ninjon reference. Ninjon's one of my favorite YouTubers next to Miniac. But yeah, especially in your first games or when you're just first getting into modeling, especially if you're a younger kid, and this is kind of where it's like researching your rule book and why you want that first over this is kind of important because, or your army book, your codex, whatever it's called, your list builder app, is because some companies will give you a bunch of stuff on the sprues, which we call bits, which they might show you how to make a bunch of these cool, awesome weapons and stuff, but when you actually go to play the game, and especially if you want a more competitive side to it or you're more of a modeler, you might accidentally build more special weapons or upgrades or poses than you're allowed in the game that you want to play. And that will kind of applies to this painting.
Yes.
So learning the game, just having fun building what you think is cool is the first step in this. As long as you are happy with how they come out, you have an opponent who's willing to teach you, and he kind of like helps you find if you're really into it without putting too much time into it.
Yes. I think once you have the models assembled, once you have your army there, it is easy enough to just ignore the question, why are they gray blobs?
Yeah.
Answers, you're clearly fighting a very advanced army of slimes. Keep up. Pay attention. But no. It's not necessary to try the game.
There's a cat over there, that's why I'm waving.
No, yes, I don't think it's necessary to paint your models in advance.
Yeah.
You should. I think you should want to.
You should,
paint your models at some point when you're ready to do so. You should want to have an army that is painted to relative to you a good skill level. It should be a mark.
Your first model. You are your biggest. Two things. You are your biggest critic. You are your biggest critic, and your first model will always suck. Yeah. If I still have a photo of it, I will post it here. If I remember, of my high elf lord on a dragon, it is done with like old acrylic artist paints. It was not primed properly. It was bad. It is also cool to see, especially if you are into the painting side, your growth. Yeah. And it's always worth keeping those first models you build and paint to show where you started from. Even Duncan Rhodes himself, the painting Jesus of like pop culture, the Bob Ross of mini painting.
Two Thin Coats
has his model still, and it is in one of the White Dwarfs of like 2 years ago. it is bad.
It's all right that it's bad. Here's the thing. That shouldn't be your end step. Shouldn't be. Don't let that be your end step.
Yeah.
You keep on. Yes, it's a mentality thing.
Yeah.
Look up some videos. Videos will show you incredible tips, tricks, and methods to get paint on your model. Yeah.
Bam.
Paint one unit at a time.
Paint one unit at a time. This is one of the, like, as a veteran painter and player, one of the biggest tips. Once you get to this point of your miniature stage, your hobby stage, this is the biggest tip I can give anyone. Because I went, when the lockdowns hit and we were getting that nice cash bonus, I went into a game store with nothing to do. And I think a lot of people did this a couple of years ago too, and was like, I like history, I like war games. That's a funky tiger. And Tiger 2. Got a Tiger 2. I need an army to play this. bought a starter box.
Yeah.
And then I just kept going in and buying things, and then before I knew it, I had about 20,000 points, which, aka, if you want to example how big that is, check out my army videos. But that was hundreds of models, and only like maybe 50 of them were painted by the time I got there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if this is Bolt Action, right?
Yeah,
Bolt Action Second Edition, 2,000 points is a pretty big army. It's not like ginormous, but that's a substantial army, and that's 10 substantial armies.
And normally in a game of Bolt Action, to give context, you're playing at that point I think nowadays it's about 1,800 or like about 2,000 now is the average. But back in the day it was 1,500 points. Again, this is what you use to balance the game, how to build your list. Your mana, how much mana you have to play your spells, is 1,500, and that will get you usually anywhere between 2 to 5 infantry guys, so 2 or like
blobs of
these guys,
these infantry.
Yeah,
10-man squads.
Your leader, a tank, and maybe like an artillery piece, sniper, machine guns. Yeah, like a heavy weapon and a tank.
Yeah.
So I went from buying up one box of that and then buying like 8 more of those in like a span of a couple of months, and I didn't even really get to play the game because no one else I knew was playing. I didn't really. I personally found out also I really like to build. I'm not a painter. I like to build the models, so I just
built them.
Yeah, I just built them. I was like, cool, I have stuff, and
good to know that about yourself.
Yeah. So if I would have actually taken the time to actually paint as I was building, and the new Bolt Action 3rd Edition starter box takes you step by step with each mission to build the models and paint them and explain why. Because a lot of historical games, they might not tell you like stage 1 build the model this way, stage 2 if you want like the heavy weapon, this is how you do it. They're just like, here's the bits, go for it.
Yeah.
The starter box in Bolt Action is really good, especially if you're afraid of historical like war games. If you don't know about the history, a lot of them nowadays are very good at telling you. Because
if you're trying to play the game and you were worried that how you build your models will make a squad of your units just invalid. Let's say you put too many special weapons on them.
Yeah.
And you can't run that squad if your friend's being a purist. Again, that's an issue.
That's your friend problem.
That's your friend's problem for a start. But let's say you only have one infantry squad, and because of you're worried you'll build it wrong and you'll have nothing. Try to avoid people who would really have a massive issue with that. First things first. But yes, how do you go around that one? Yeah. Ideally, you'll eventually read and learn enough about the rules that you'll avoid that pitfall.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you pace yourself, you're less likely to overcommit, especially when you're in that discovery and figuring out stage. That might prevent you from making an error.
Yep.
That might prevent you from making a choice that I don't want to say you'll regret, but that takes away resources from a different thing that you would later come to realize, I would have preferred that.
Yeah. No accidents, only happy
coincidences
or whatever. Yeah. So that's why I say it's do it one unit at a time. And by the time you're done that box, you'll figure out what you're into, what you like. You've probably played a game potentially, and when you look back, you will have a fully painted army that you can add on to, instead of buying a full 2,000 points army for a game. Maybe painting a couple pieces, a couple units, feeling kind of burnt out, and either realizing you really like the army, but now you have a lot more models that you have to paint because the pile of gray does not stop.
No.
You will look back and blink your eyes, and you will have 2 more boxes of your preferred games sitting there ready to be opened and built.
It's like a time debuff. Every time it loops over and ticks.
Yeah. Every 10 seconds you have a 50% chance of spawning a new box.
Except every 10 seconds is every payday.
Yeah.
But on that point, we're also talking about what you enjoy the most about the game. If you enjoy building units, you're going to find out which units you like to build the most.
Yes.
Maybe you like vehicles, and it's like vehicles, aircraft. I want within my game to maximize my vehicles, aircraft, because I've done the testing, I've figured it out. They're the most fun to build. I get the most reward out of them. There are questions about if your favorite thing is viable or how much of it you can field. That's within the game. Just figure out what you like first, and then you can go towards that. And same thing with painting, oddly enough. I've known people who hate painting metal, and I know people who love painting metal. Once you know that, you can sort of raise the question within yourself, do I need an army that has a bunch of metal in order to have a good time painting it?
Yeah.
Is that something I want enough that I'm going to quest out and at the end of the day be like, I've got 40 Necron soldiers and I just love the metalwork on them, and that gives me joy. You can once you start understanding your painting process, your building process, clip away at your pile of shame, you're going to really figure out what you want going forwards, what you want next, and also what variants within your own faction, within your own army you want to focus on.
And that's been our TED Talk on painting one unit at a time. Leading to that, going back,
we're learning too.
We've talked about it's okay to play, videos. Now we are on to the actual splitting of the category into what to look for your basically now painting.
Mm-hmm.
This can be seen for your build, and this can be seen for your play. So now we're on to the painting section, which primer.
Right. Okay, lovely. Primer, generally speaking, is going to be the base coat that you apply to all of your figures.
Yes.
And primer it's a great foundation. I believe it's a surface that other paints have an easier time sticking to.
Yep.
And also, if you start with your dark and recessed areas color, you get to build out of that. So that would be a process called adding highlights. You're more the expert on this one.
Yeah. So a primer, which I actually have one right here. This is your can to take home if you want. It's basically empty. But so something like this is a can primer. A lot of game stores are going to have this. You might even actually see a version of this, which I have right here.
Ooh.
It's nice to have the paint stand right beside you.
Very convenient.
One of these, which is a Krylon can that you might see at a Home Depot or a Staples or whatever, depending on your country. It's a canned air cat. The cat is interested in primer.
Ooh.
She is interested in learning. But that is a general form of primer that you'll most likely see. It is a canned primer. Uses compressed air. I think it's got the polymer or something, whatever the fancy word is. But the idea is, you take a built model, you hit them with a light coat of the of it, and what that will do is adds a nice smooth layer that is very tacky,
mm-hmm.
that will have your paint stick to it. And that's basically what a primer is.
Yep. Primer cans tend to have a shaker ball in it. Before you use primer, please just shake the heck out of it, make it nice and fairly evenly mixed, because I do believe it tends to settle as it rests.
They're used for getting that base layer down. It helps paint stick to the model so it doesn't chip off. If you paint it directly to the plastic or metal,
mm-hmm.
you're going to have a bad time. These can be usually used for, and they do come in a bunch of colors nowadays, even if you use paint from a hardware store. Just be very careful when you use it because it can glob up, whereas the rattle cans from Games Workshop or other model painting specific companies are designed for minis, so they don't stain as much.
Yeah, plus they have these fine details in mind.
Yeah.
When they design the paint, they're making something that's a good compromise in stickiness versus not covering up the quality, but actually getting into those recesses.
Yeah. Army paint is pretty good. Vallejo ones that are matte will go on gloss and then they'll dry and suck in matte. It's pretty interesting to see, but that's kind of what you're looking for. Rattle cans are great for if you have a bunch of models you're painting and you can go outside or have a nice place that's ventilated and warm. If you don't, and the only option you have is say your garage and it's cold, bringing a not boiling container of water, but a warm container of water that you can put the can into, or maybe even using one I saw for somebody who's in a very cold place all the time is he actually uses a very low heated hair dryer where he'll hair dry the model so that it's warm.
Oh, lovely.
Then he has the can in that warm pot of water, or even just submerges half of it into the a mug of hot water, and he primes the model. And then when he's done the layers of primers, he hits it again with a hair dryer on the model so that it dries uniformly over a warm surface. Because it's a propellant, if you do it in cold, it will dry up and you'll get droplets and you'll get a splatter effect, unless that's something cool you want to do with a blood color.
Sure.
But it will splatter and it won't look good. It'll be all textury and it's just bad time.
Yeah.
That's where you probably want a brush on primer, which a lot of these paint starter sets, which we're going to talk to about here after this little rant, is the place you want to go. Paint on, it's going to be a lot slower, but if you say you're doing like 1 or 2 models at a time, or you don't have a place where you can use an airbrush or a can to prime, this is going to be your best way to do it. And Vallejo now is starting to make actually colored, including metallic primers that you can paint on.
Cool.
Do you have any little things you want to add on for primers?
No, not specifically. They're designed to be the first thing you put on your model. I'm not so massive into the painting side. This is a hobby blind spot I want to fix, but I'm actually new in this regard. I'm famous amongst my friends for running Graybles, gray unpainted miniatures. I want to fix that in the new year, but that is sort of where my...
Getting to the last section, which is the starter sets.
Mm-hmm.
Every major miniature painting company makes a starter set. Usually they'll have it with tools also, or you have a tool set and a paint set.
Yes.
Army Painter does both, and they actually make speed paints, which are their contrast paints, as a starter set plus a tool set. If you buy those two things, you'll be set for any miniature thing that you do.
Yeah. You'll be looked after for a good while.
Yeah. So I highly recommend getting a paint starter set. If you don't have the ability to get one, or maybe they're out and you're looking for gifts, usually the person at the counter will be really good at anywhere between how advanced you are and what you're looking for. Will be very good at telling you what kind of primary paints you should have to start. Like every paint range has a set of paints that everyone has in their collection. Like a good example for Games Workshop paints, depending on, even if you don't know exactly, like I want grimdark paints, or I want I'm painting this specific faction. Just like, I need primary paints because I'm kind of looking into a fantasy setting, or I'm looking into a sci-fi setting, and I like the colors of the models painted from Games Workshop. And they'll be like, oh, well, then you want the Citadel paints. And then they'll be like, if you want Citadel, they're the paint pots that have like the actual lids.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we'll get into more detail about actual painting later on, about the different pots and colors and stuff. You usually want something like, you want like a white, a yellow, a red, a green. Your primary colors, a primer, a dark shade, and a metallic.
Yeah.
And they'll usually kind of show you that, plus a generic brush, usually a number 2 for into brushes. Or a lot of these starter sets will just have a starter paintbrush in mind with all the different color paints you need.
Yeah, I think most common you'll find a starter paint set that has a starter paintbrush.
Yep.
Honestly, just having a set of paints that is designed for miniatures, I find they tend to be very usable across all sorts of different miniatures within a hobby. Great place to start.
All the board is used. I paid for the board. I'm going to use the board. Part 4. What is next? So, as this series is going to be a category, kind of like step-by-step video, this is basically every video is going to have this section. Right. So, if you've had enough of us talking, or you've skipped to the parts you'd like and now you're at the end here, thank you so much for watching. But we're going to spend a little bit more of your time to kind of talk about things. If depending on how I cut this, if it's a long-winded video or if it's in 2 parts, I'll have this section in both parts. This will be the end cap of it. But anyways, Point is, we've talked a lot, so you probably forgot some things, or your brain rotted from, lack of attention like I do with some videos. That will lead us into our first part, which is the recap. Mm-hmm. So in this video, we talked about a lot of stuff. So going over it in order, we talked about what is a war game, where to start, not as like getting your army, playing, all that stuff, though we did kind of dip our toes into that. We were more like, how did we start, looking to what we want to play. How do you get into the wargame hobby itself? And then that led into our section of, even I brain farted.
It's okay. Once you've decided what you want to try,
yeah.
What's your step to getting into that specific game?
Yes.
Start with one specific game. I definitely think we've made the point about, if you stretch your net too far, you run the risk of overcommitting to either an army playstyle or a game that you just don't quite enjoy. Save yourself the burn. Start small, see how it goes, and go on from there.
Yeah. We learned history, where to start, how to figure out what you're into, getting that first sort of researching, R&D, research developing into the what you think is cool, how to find those game stores, and like find out what you're actually into. Then that ending with what to buy to prepare for those models and stuff you're into, and how to kind of like also side tangent talking about how to get into playing and like seeing your first game to figure out what you're into, and then buying the supplies for said game, which then leads us into, after that recap, what we're going to be doing in the next video. Which,
so, Mr. Hellcat,
yes.
where do we go from here?
So, going next in our next video in this little journey of ours into wargaming, we are going to be talking about actually playing the game. Where do you go from you figured out what you're into, you have you bought, like maybe you bought a couple of folding tables, or you have like a board that you can put on top of your table counter to play. You figured out what system you're into, you bought some glue, you bought a starter paint set. Now you want to figure out what actually do you want to play, like how your faction, building an army, and getting it army like play ready. Yeah. How to play the game and how to get into playing it.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about, which will lead into talking about actual like more in depth of what is a starter box, playing your first game, building a list. We're going to basically take those gray models that you looked at and that you're prepared to paint. We're actually going to go buy those models, put them on the table, paint them up, and play with them. And like at least get prepared to play with them, depending on the length of the video.
Yes. Sure.
But yeah, that's basically going to be the next video. And with that, all I can say is I have nothing else left to say. Do you have anything else you want to add to this video?
Just some more goodwill. If you're interested in it, I think you'll enjoy it. I've enjoyed my wargaming experience. I've done it for a good long while, but if you're new to it, anyone can do it. You will if you is the most important thing. If you have a good local shop, if you have someone who's a good opponent, you're going to be able to make that journey from thinking about this into it being a reality, and it's going to be fun. You're going to figure it out. None of this is beyond you. Know that you are capable of all of this and making it a good experience.
Yep. So with that, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully we weren't too long. If not, excuse me. Thinking about the editing of this and promising it being out, I think I will cut this into 2 videos. So please, if you've watched all the way here, or you watched this is the second video that you watched and you made it this far, or you skipped to this point, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you guys in the next video. Now, I don't know when that will be. These are definitely a lot longer, more like in-depth videos that we have to actually set some time for. If Callum wants to join in, if not, it'll just be me or somebody else. But hopefully you guys like this. If not, then it was just a fun video to do, and I can do quick recaps on my own at some other time. But yeah, we will. With that, thanks so much. We will see you in the next video, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Bye-bye.
Bye.